Take a good look at this massive vessel. Even when caught amidst monstrous waves, towering nearly 35 feet high on the open sea, it manages to hold its own. At first glance, it might seem as though these waves would crush and shatter the ship within a matter of seconds. Yet, in reality, the exact opposite occurs. Even amidst such a ferocious ocean, these colossal ships do not sink easily. This resilience is driven by a set of extraordinary scientific principles. Therefore, in today's video, we will demonstrate how these ships manage to survive even when confronted by the world's most terrifying ocean waves. We will explore exactly how a ship navigates through violent storms, how its internal mechanisms function, and how its unique structural design renders it virtually invincible even in the most extreme conditions. If you closely examine the bow or front section of a large cargo ship, you will notice that its hull does not descend vertically downward. Instead, as it rises upward, it curves slightly outward. This specific design is not merely for aesthetics. Rather, it is engineered specifically to withstand the ocean's formidable waves. When a massive wave crashes against the ship's bow, this curved section deflects the wave's immense energy sideways. Consequently, the water is prevented from striking the hull with a direct, blunt force. In other words, much of the impact, an impact powerful enough to damage even steel, is dissipated into the air and rendered harmless. Another crucial factor is that this distinctive shape provides the ship with additional buoyancy. When the ship descends into the trough, the deepest part, between two massive waves, the hydrostatic pressure of the water pushes it back upward. As a result, the ship is able to right itself before sinking too deeply. This is precisely why the bow and stern, the front and rear sections of large ships, are constructed to be slightly higher than the rest of the vessel. During storms, it is typically from these directions that the surging seawater rises highest. This additional height often serves to prevent water from breaching the deck and flooding the ship's interior. Indeed, every curve, every angle, and every design element of a ship is meticulously crafted to wage a battle against the ocean's terrifying waves. However, the ship's true resilience, its core mechanism, is not confined solely to its visible upper structure. It also lies hidden beneath the waterline. Beneath the bow of large ships, one can observe a bulbous, spherical protrusion, a feature specifically engineered to mitigate the force of the waves. At first glance, it might seem that this feature would slow the ship down. In reality, however, it does exactly the opposite. As the ship moves forward, this section generates a small counterpressure against the oncoming waves. Consequently, the impact of the sea is significantly mitigated. During storms, it also provides the ship's bow with additional buoyancy, preventing the vessel from suddenly plunging too deep into the water. Yet, another major mechanism at play here is, how does such a massive steel vessel manage to stay afloat at all? After all, if a solid piece of steel were simply dropped into the water, it would sink instantly. The true secret, therefore, lies within the ship's hollow internal structure. A vast quantity of air is trapped inside the ship's massive hull. When this colossal structure settles upon the water, it displaces a tremendous volume of liquid. This displaced water in turn exerts an upward force against the ship, a force known as buoyancy. Simply put, the more water a ship displaces, the greater the upward thrust exerted upon it by the water. To remain afloat, a massive cargo ship must displace thousands of tons of water. Consequently, a ship's length, width, and depth are calculated with meticulous precision during its construction. It is during storms that the true test of these calculations begins. Massive waves crash over the deck, causing excess water to accumulate and making the ship significantly heavier. When this occurs, even if the ship settles slightly lower in the water, it begins to displace an even greater volume of liquid, thereby re-establishing its equilibrium. You may have noticed that during a storm, A ship often lists heavily to one side, sometimes tilting by as much as 40 degrees. From a distance, it might appear as though the vessel is on the verge of capsizing, yet just a few seconds later, it rights itself once again. The reason for this is that the ship's heavy engines, fuel tanks, and other weighty components are invariably positioned toward the bottom of the vessel. Consequently, no matter how severely the ship lists, these heavy lower sections constantly strive to pull it back to its original upright position. It is precisely for this reason that, even amidst the fury of violent ocean storms, these colossal vessels repeatedly manage to cheat death. Fundamentally, the ship's stability is governed by a complex scientific calculation. Engineers design ships by precisely calculating the spatial relationship between the vessel's center of gravity, where its weight is concentrated, and the point at which the buoyant force of the water exerts its upward pressure. For if the ship were to right itself too abruptly, it would begin to oscillate violently. Conversely, if a vessel recovers its balance too slowly, it risks losing control during times of peril. Therefore, every ship is designed to strike a perfect balance between safety and stability. However, even the ocean has its limits. Danger arises when massive waves cause a ship to tilt so severely that one side of its deck dips beneath the water's surface. This is because, at that critical moment, seawater begins to flood the interior through vents, doors, or small openings. Once a significant volume of water becomes trapped inside the hull, the entire balance of the ship is disrupted. Consequently, the vessel is no longer able to right itself as it did before. It gradually tilts even further and may ultimately capsize. But here is an interesting fact. Did you know that such massive ships are not actually constructed to be completely rigid? This is because, while navigating massive waves, the hull of a ship actually flexes. At times, the midsection rises upward. Moments later, it dips in the opposite direction. In essence, the entire vessel twists and writhes in rhythm with the waves, much like a colossal steel serpent. For this very reason, ships are engineered with a degree of flexibility. Were they completely rigid, a few massive waves could easily snap the vessel in two at its midpoint. During a storm, strange sounds resonate within the ship. The muffled groans of straining steel, the creaking of metal joints. It feels as though the entire vessel is breathing. This is because every incoming wave exerts thousands of tons of pressure against the ship's hull. Furthermore, if waves strike repeatedly in a precise rhythmic pattern, the resulting vibrations can gradually intensify. This phenomenon is known as resonance. Under such circumstances, even massive ships can occasionally be torn apart at their center. To mitigate this risk, the ship's interior is compartmentalized into numerous distinct sections. Sturdy steel bulkheads separate these sections, ensuring that even if a breach occurs in one area, water cannot spread throughout the entire vessel. Consequently, even if one compartment becomes flooded, the remaining sections can still generate sufficient buoyancy to keep the ship afloat. Since the era of the Titanic, this technology has undergone significant advancements. However, technology alone is not the sole factor. The decisions made by the crew are equally critical. Long before a storm arrives, the captain begins closely monitoring weather reports. Sometimes, the ship is diverted onto an alternative route. At other times, it remains docked in port to wait out the weather. For the cardinal rule of the sea is not to attempt to conquer a storm, but rather to evade it whenever possible. Yet, when evasion is impossible, preparations go into full swing. Thousands of tons of cargo containers are secured with heavy-duty locking mechanisms. Every door is sealed tight and rendered watertight. Even the smallest openings are meticulously inspected, as a single minor leak can quickly escalate into a catastrophic situation. Even the ship's internal machinery and furnishings are lashed down, for if the vessel lists by as much as 50 degrees, even small, loose objects can transform into lethal projectiles. Finally, while keeping a vigilant eye on the ocean swells, the captain precisely adjusts the ship's speed and heading. For if a wave strikes at an improper angle, the entire vessel will begin to pitch and roll violently. Moving too fast poses a danger. Moving too slowly poses a danger as well. Consequently, decisions must be made at every single moment. Furthermore, located in the lower section of the ship is a specialized water tank. By filling and emptying this tank, the vessel's balance is meticulously controlled. However, there is absolutely no room for error in this task. This is because if a half-filled water tank were to slosh violently from one side to the other, the ship's stability could be severely compromised. Amidst all these challenges, the entire crew battles against storms day after day. Often, for 2 or 3 consecutive days, no one is able to get any proper sleep, for a single erroneous decision could send the entire ship to the bottom of the ocean. Moreover, history reminds us that not every ship ultimately manages to return safely from the jaws of such storms. There are times when the sheer power of the ocean overwhelms even the most advanced technology and the entirety of human experience. Such tragedies have unfolded many times throughout history. Typically, when the Atlantic Ocean generates a hurricane, it tracks in a northerly and easterly direction. However, in 2015, Hurricane Joaquin began moving in the exact opposite direction, and that is precisely where a catastrophic error occurred. For at that very moment, the massive cargo vessel El Faro was traversing that exact same route. Initially, the storm was perceived as nothing out of the ordinary. Yet fueled by warm ocean waters, it rapidly intensified within a matter of hours, evolving into a ferocious Category 3 hurricane. Wind speeds soared to over 180 kilometers per hour. Some of the ship's officers immediately sensed the impending danger and advised the captain to alter their course. The captain, however, remained convinced that everything was under control. Subsequent investigations revealed that he had been relying on weather data that was several hours old, despite the fact that the ship's satellite system had already provided updated information clearly indicating that the storm was bearing down directly upon the vessel. Consequently, in the early hours of October 1st, El Faro sailed into the very heart, the most violent section of the hurricane. It faced waves towering nearly 40 feet high and winds gusting at over 100 miles per hour. Gradually, the ship began to list heavily to one side. It was later discovered that water had begun seeping in through a small opening somewhere on the hull, accumulating within the cargo hold. The situation then deteriorated further. The engine systems began to fail, and within moments, the ship lost all power. And with the engines shut down, a ship at sea becomes virtually helpless, for it can no longer maintain its heading directly into the waves. The El Faro turned broadside and was left exposed to the full fury of the storm. Consequently, the sea delivered its most devastating blows against the vessel's flank. Ultimately, the captain gave the order to abandon ship. However, escaping in the midst of a hurricane proved to be nearly impossible. At the time, the El Faro was equipped with older-style open lifeboats, vessels simply not designed to withstand such violent storms. Within a matter of minutes, the entire ship vanished into the darkness of the ocean. The El Faro sank to a depth of nearly 15,000 feet. 2 years later, the ship's black box was recovered from the ocean floor. Inside, it held the harrowing audio recordings of the vessel's final 26 hours. The subsequent investigation revealed a tragic saga of one poor decision after another. Stories of outdated control systems, inaccurate weather data, and sheer negligence. This incident made one thing abundantly clear: the sea never forgives a mistake. No matter how modern the vessel, nor how advanced its technology, a single erroneous decision can ultimately send a ship weighing thousands of tons to the bottom of the ocean. How do you think you would feel if you found yourself caught in the midst of one of the world's most terrifying ocean storms? Feel free to share your thoughts with us in the comments section below. If you enjoyed today's video, please give it a like. You can also subscribe to our channel to stay updated. We look forward to seeing you in the next episode. Thank you.